Hello and welcome to something a little bit different from me. Today I'm going to be doing a book review. Quite obviously this book, The Commodore 64 Collector's Guide to Mastertronic by Colin Poole. So a book review is not something I've done before, and to do this review I've got my camera set up on a tripod and I'm sitting to the left of it, so I'm over here. So what I'm going to try and do is go through the book as best I can by sitting next to it. It's not the ideal scenario or situation to find myself in, but I'll do my best. So just going into the background of this book, firstly, my interest in it. Obviously I'm a fan of Mastertronic games. I've played them all on my channel and reviewed them, and I am a collector myself, so that's of interest to me for that reason. So the background to the book is that it began life as a Kickstarter. It was done by Colin Poole along with Fusion Retro Books. The Kickstarter was fully funded within about 48 hours, I think. And I didn't actually buy the book via the Kickstarter. I didn't pledge because I missed out on the options with all the perks. So I decided to wait until it was just published by Fusion Retro Books. It is also available on their website, and that's where I got it from. Cost me £25 plus about £4 postage, I think. So quite pricey for a book, but it is quite a big book. I'll get into whether I think it's worth that money in due course. Now, Colin did appear on one episode of my Budget Publisher Showdown series, and we talked about the book in that, and there's also an extended version of that chat on the deleted scenes episode of the Budget Publisher Showdown. So I'll put a link to that in the corner of the screen so you can check that out if you want to find out a little bit more background about the book. But let's now get on and actually look inside and also at the front cover of the book, and we'll start there. So here's the front cover. It's designed very similar to a classic 199 range game from Mastertronic, as you can see, with the Mastertronic logo at the bottom there. Big text on the front. There's not a lot else to say. It says Fast Loader Commodore 64 in the corner. That's obviously a nod to the original packaging of those Mastertronic games as well. The spine is just completely blank, which is a bit strange. You can see it says C64 at the top and also a 1 at the bottom, signifying that I think there's going to be more of these perhaps for the Spectrum and other systems as well. I think that has actually been confirmed. And on the back cover you get an overview of what the book's about, which is obviously a guide to Mastertronic. It tells you it's got over 500 pages, 230 cover scans, 800 screenshots, Mastertronic catalogues, collector's checklists, top 10 games, rare and hard to find games, and much more. And it's also got some logos from some of the most well-known Mastertronic games on there as well. So the first thing that surprised me about the book when I received it is that it's a hardcover, hardback book. I was expecting it to be a soft cover, to be honest. And it also comes with this dust cover on it. Now if you take that away, you may be a fan of them, you may not be. Underneath it's exactly the same, so it's got exactly the same printing, so you can still display it on your shelf if you want to without the dust cover. Personally, I kept the dust cover on while I was reading it, although I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of dust covers generally speaking. So let's quickly go through the opening sort of pages of the book. Obviously you've got the copyright information, contents page with lots of the logos for Mastertronic, the different brands. You've then got a foreword which is done by Anthony Guter, former Mastertronic financial controller. So that's quite nice, gives you a little bit of information about how Mastertronic was put together and also their sort of sales strategy and things like that. It then go on to an introduction from Colin, which is 3 pages long, and I'm not going to go into that. Obviously I'm not going to go into too much detail about what the book contains. If you want to find that out, you need to buy your own copy. So it then goes on, you've got a picture of Colin playing on a Commodore 16, and also a picture of his Mastertronic collection, which is very nicely arranged on some shelving. And then it goes into some press information and things like that, and finally it goes into the sort of overview of what's going to be included in the reviews, and it's got this sales rating for how many copies were sold, and there's a guide to that there, so you'll see that throughout the review pages. You can kind of reference back to whether it was a big or small selling game. So let's move on to the actual reviews, and it starts by a big section covering the 199 range. This is obviously the classic range that Mastertronic were known for, and it doesn't break it down by packaging style. So quite quickly you can see it starts with 1985. It's basically in alphabetical order. So we've got Action Biker, but then it goes to Agent X2, which was in the second packaging style, Alcazar, which was in another packaging style. So it doesn't break it down chronologically. You don't have the earliest ones first and then the later ones later. It's all the 199 games in one section of the book. I'm not sure I would have done it that way, but you know, everyone's got their own sort of thoughts on how they do lay the thing out. So personally I think I would have done all the classic grid style packaging ones first and then do the other ranges afterwards, but there you go. So for each review you've got the details about the game, so the name, the product code, the release date, what label it was on, who it was developed by, number of players, type of game genre, what other systems it was released on, and that sales rating that I already mentioned. You also get an image of the cover artwork and lots of screenshots of the game, usually a title screen and at least 2 or 3 of the in-game screenshots as well. If it's had a Zap review or another magazine review, you'll probably see that as well. You get the aim of the game, which is usually a short paragraph about the aim of the game, what you're supposed to do. And then every entry's got what's called the lowdown, which is a review, and they're done by a variety of people. This one was done by Paul Morrison. Let's move on a little bit. You've got another one by Paul Morrison there. Then you've got 3 in a row by Paul Morrison, and that make that 4. Paul Morrison did a lot of them, it seems. Then you've got one by Retro Faith there, one by Gordon King, and Colin himself did some reviews, and I think also Robin Hogg, who used to write for Zap 64, he's got a few in there as well. So yeah, a lot of them done by Paul Morrison, quite a few by Colin, and then a few other contributors as well. So they all write the reviews in their own style. Some of them are pretty good, some of them are a little bit loaded with the puns, which you may or may not like. It depends on your sense of humour, but generally they're pretty light-hearted reviews, and most of the time I would say they're pretty much on the button in terms of the assessment of the game. On some sections you'll also get scoring things, bonuses, controls, things like that. They go into detail about what the controls are, and also occasionally you'll get something like this, which is a note. In this case, Excalibur is a sequel to Jetsoft's Cavelon, which was released, and it was released originally by Jetsoft as Cavelon 2 in 1984, so this was actually a re-release. Again, you've got the different screenshots, and a screenshot in this case of the original game Cavelon. So yeah, in some cases you'll get a note, a bit of extra trivia about it. So yeah, the layout's very similar for each page, but it's, you know, nicely done. Not particularly flashy. There's a lot of white space. In this one you've got an advert for the original Activision release of a game, that was Hacker 2. Let's just move on and see if we see anything else of note. Another note here about Kickstart being based loosely on the Kickstart TV show, and there's an image from that show as well. And on it goes, really. Lots of bits of trivia. Pretty good reviews of most of the games. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but most of them are pretty well done. And yeah, it's just a big section on that 199 range to start with. Now, as I mentioned, sometimes it does mention what the controls are. I'm just going to skip forward quite a little bit into the book here, because sometimes they go a little, I would say a little bit overkill with the details on the controls. If you look at this one, that's quite a lot of detail about the controls for a snooker game, for example. It does vary, you know, depending on what information they decided to fill the pages with. So yeah, anyway, moving on to this second section. After the big section on the 199 range, it goes on to talk about the MAD range, which obviously was the 299 range. Again, there's lots of nice imagery throughout the books of like promotional stuff and things like that. Here's another one of those special notes. Here's Action Force, which was released in the MAD packaging. It's got a bit of information about the fact it was based on the Action Force action figures. So moving on from the MAD section, it then goes on to Mastertronic Plus, which was a sort of successor to MAD with the another 299 range. So again, lots of information about that. There's a big note about Barry McGuigan, because it's talking about Barry McGuigan's boxing. Big controls about Fighting Warrior there. As I say, sometimes filling half a page with the controls might seem a little bit like overkill, but there you go. That's what they did, so fair play. I certainly wouldn't be able to put a book together of this standard, so I'm not going to complain about it too much. I'm just pointing out things that may or may not be of interest from a critical perspective. So after the MAD and Mastertronic Plus, it goes on to talking about, we'll get back to some of these features later, but the Ricochet re-release range. There's a section for that, which covers all their releases in that packaging. Again, with the same sort of information, for example, mentioning that Crazy Comets was influenced by Mad Planets, the arcade game. Dan Dare was featured in Eagle Comic, things like that. So lots of nice bits of trivia where applicable. Obviously, quite a bit of information there about Ghostbusters and how to be a complete bastard. We'll move on. Yeah, so after that section, which I'll get through eventually. Here we go. Yeah, so after that section, that's the Ricochet. It then moves on to some of the other smaller sub-labels that Mastertronic did. Entertainment USA, a few pages on that. I'll just point out one review that I didn't agree with while we're here is, you guessed it, if you've seen the Budget Publisher Showdown, Street Surfer. It's got that criminal Zap review there, and also Paul Morrison's review basically says he didn't like it that much, so I have to disagree with that one, but there we go. We then move on to the Bulldog range. There's also a page here for Master Adventurer, of which there's just the one title for. So there's the Bulldog range done much in the same way as the Entertainment USA. And then as we move to the end, there's also a small section about other labels. Just 2 pages about Racket and a couple of pages about Americana. They weren't Mastertronic games, they were them re-releasing, publishing for other companies, so there's not a huge amount of detail on those. Tronics as well, which was a successor to the Mastertronic range when Mastertronic was bought out by Virgin Games. So just to skip back a little bit, we've got some feature pages as well. These crop up at various points throughout the book. So there's a page about Invader Load, which obviously you'll probably well know was a game that you played while the real game was loading up, and it tells you a fairly big list of all the games that featured that, although I should note it's only the Mastertronic games, not the Ricochet ones in that case. It's also got a page about Aqua, which was a game by Mastertronic given away on the front of a magazine. Later on we've got, let me just find the page, gone a bit too far now. Something about Chiller, which originally had the music from Michael Jackson's Thriller, which wasn't taken very kindly, shall we say, so it was re-released with a different type of music. There's a bit of information there about compilations and special things to look out for. And again, moving on a little bit later into the book, really far into the book. So we then move on to the final part of the book, which is the summary sections, and I'm going to start on this page because I don't mind showing you this. I don't want to show you the top 5 and bottom 5 because I don't want to give it away. But here we've got the rare and hard to find. These are the rarest games according to Colin, and I would agree with quite a few of these. Certainly Five-A-Side Soccer, Pigs in Space and Aqua were in my top 5 hardest to find games, and the other 3 that I mentioned, I don't remember Octoplex being particularly hard to find, but these 2 were fairly rare as well. So yeah, I can't disagree with that too much. So there is also the 5 best and 5 worst games, and what I'm going to do is pixel out all but one of those because I don't want to give too much away, because I'd like it to be a surprise for you if you do decide to buy the book. So we'll look at 5 of the best, but as I said, I'm going to pixel all those out except for one which I also put in my top 10 Mastertronic games when I did my series, which is 3D Pinball. So I was quite surprised to see that one in there, but I agree, it was a good game, really good in fact. So I agree with you, Colin. Definitely a game to have in, not necessarily the 5 of the best for me, but definitely within the top 10. And several of these other games on this page, which I'm not showing you, were also featured in my top 10 Mastertronic games. So then we move to 5 of the worst. So again, I'm going to pixel out all of these but one, and the one I'm going to leave on in this case is Speed Zone, which again, that made it into my worst 10 Mastertronic games. Really awful game. And once again, I agree with pretty much everything on this page, and most of the games featured on this page were also in my worst 10 Mastertronic games. So moving on to the very back few pages of the book, we've got some information about other things that Mastertronic did, including the Magnum Light Phaser, the Tronics Mastertronic User Club. That's interesting. There's a reprint of the Tronics sort of catalogue there, or an advert for it, so that's a really nice thing to have. There's a Mastertronic catalogue, which I have actually got a copy of myself, so that's fully reprinted in the back as well. That's really nice thing to have. And more about those blister packs there, and also right at the end, as well as the Commodore 64 top sellers, we've also got a collector's games checklist. Now, if you are a collector, here's a nice checklist for you, but I don't imagine anyone's actually going to go and make marks in the book to actually tick them off, but if you wanted to, you can. So it's got a full list of all the games in all the ranges, which is really useful, even if you just took a scan of it to actually use as your own checklist. I think that's a great thing to add into the back of the book, and it really gears it towards collectors. And finally, right at the back, there's another advert. There's several adverts scattered throughout the book, although it has to be said that Mastertronic didn't do a lot of advertising, so they've done well to find the very few adverts that they did do. And there's also an index at the back which gives you the page numbers for all the different games that are in the book. So yeah, overall, really nicely presented. Little bit of nitpicking I should do, I suppose. Firstly, there are a few typos in there here and there. That's just inevitable. I don't think that's a huge problem. But the one thing that I did notice, which is a bit of a shame, is that in the entry for Skyjet, it's actually got the screenshots from Non-Terraqueous, the 4 screenshots and the loading screen. So that's a little bit of a shame, especially as it seems to have the review score from Zap there, but not the screenshots for some reason. So a little bit of missing out on something on the proofreading there, which is a little bit of a shame. But as far as I know, that's the only real major mistake in the whole book. So apart from, as I said, a couple of typos, there might be a few factual inaccuracies here and there, but I wouldn't necessarily know those myself anyway. So yeah, the one thing I think it could have done with that it hasn't got is, because it's a collector's guide, I feel like it would have been nice if it had some kind of rarity rating or price guide. So for example, obviously most games can be picked up for £2 or £3 still. There are a few games like Five-A-Side Soccer and Pigs in Space where you can expect to pay anything over £20 for those kind of games. So it would have been nice to have a price guide, even if it's just based on Colin's own findings and eBay searches and things like that, or a rarity rating, you know, sort of kind of like the thing I did on the Firebird games. Like it'd be like common, uncommon, rare, or very rare, or even unobtainable possibly for some of them. So yeah, that would have been a nice addition to make it a little bit more of a geared toward collectors kind of thing. But that's nitpicking again. I think it's a really nice book. As it's, in terms of value for money, well, you've got pretty much 500 pages for £25, so it's a good value. It's good as a coffee table book just to flick through and reminisce about the games that you remembered playing when you were a kid. But also, if you're a collector, it's a brilliant guide to every game that Mastertronic released, with a review of each of them, the controls. So if you wanted to download an emulator version of a game and play it, it's handily got the controls for most of the games. As I said, probably goes a little bit over the top with the controls on a few of them, but you know, I'm nitpicking again. It's fair play to the guys that produced this. It's a really nice looking book. It's printed really well. It's glossy. It looks the part, you know, it looks really nice. So overall, quite impressed by it. I definitely recommend buying it if you're a Commodore 64 games fan, if you particularly like Mastertronic, and especially if you're a Mastertronic collector. So there you go, that concludes my first ever book review on my channel. Hope you enjoyed watching it, and if you have bought the book and you've got any thoughts about it, then let me know in the video comments. And if this has convinced you to buy it, then let me know what you think of it when you bought it. So once again, thanks to Colin for putting the book together, and also the people that contributed the reviews. Thank you also to Chris Wilkins for actually publishing the book through Fusion Retro Books. I think you've done a great job, and I think most people are now looking forward to seeing what other volumes come, and I think we're very much expecting Volume 2 to be Spectrum, and then Volume 3 to be for all the other systems, as is my understanding. So I'm sure they'll be coming and announced in the near future, and there'll be Kickstarters for those as well. So thanks very much for watching this video. I'll be back with another one very soon, which will be back to playing video games rather than talking about a book about them. So thanks again, and see you next time.